Today we're diving into the age-old debate Windows versus Linux. Which one is better for you? Let's find out. Windows, the dominant force in the desktop market, known for its user-friendly interface and extensive software library. On the other hand, we have Linux, the open-source champion, praised for its flexibility, security, and passionate community. In this video, we'll break down the key differences between these operating systems, comparing them head-to-head across 5 crucial categories: user interface, software availability, security, performance, and cost. By the end, you'll have a clear understanding of which OS reigns supreme for your specific needs.
One of the big benefits I think we can all enjoy is that switching to Linux isn't going to cost you as much money. You can download any Linux distribution for free, but the savings go a lot deeper than just the software side of things. As a lot of people already know, or will find out when they try to upgrade to Windows 11, is that a lot of PCs are not actually compatible with it. And this is because Windows 11 has a pretty strict TPM 2.0 requirement in order to function on your computer, which is a feature that CPUs older than Intel's 8th generation core processors just generally don't have. Now, maybe you're thinking, well, who cares about 8th gen chips? I mean, they're ancient history, right? But that hardware is still more than capable for most workloads. The 7th gen i7 chips, for example, have 4 cores and 8 threads, and if you were to pair that with a decent graphics card and 16 or maybe even 32 gigabytes of RAM, you could have a desktop that is still powerful enough to play modern video games on, but you might still struggle to get Windows 11 running on that very same PC. Which really sucks if you bought your games through Steam, because they actually tend to drop support for Windows operating systems within Steam a few years after Microsoft does. Luckily, the Steam Deck runs a modified version of Arch Linux, so gaming compatibility is getting better every day in the Linux world as more game developers actually take Steam Deck compatibility into consideration. And speaking of gaming, another big benefit of running Linux is just having a lower system overhead, which can give you better performance in the programs that you actually care about. A lot of the bloat that's accumulated in Windows over the years has resulted in that operating system needing a lot more power to be able to run somewhat smoothly and still not being as stable as you would expect it to be on a high-performance PC. Now, it's not quite as bad as it was in the Windows ME and 90 series days, but modern Windows still experiences more bugs that cause kernel crashes than Linux does, which is a big part of the reason that Linux servers are preferred for running websites and other applications that need to have a high uptime.
Windows has always been known for its straightforward approach. You've got the iconic Start menu, the taskbar, and a familiar layout that's easy to navigate, even for beginners. It just feels intuitive, right? Click, point, and get things done. Linux, however, offers a more diverse landscape. You have a wide array of desktop environments, from the Windows like Cinnamon and KDE Plasma to the minimalist XFCE and the highly customizable GNOME. Now, this flexibility is amazing for power users who want to tweak every aspect of their experience. But for someone coming from Windows, it can feel a bit overwhelming at first. Linux definitely has a steeper learning curve, requiring some patience and a willingness to explore. But hey, that's part of the adventure. Think of it like this. Windows is like a comfortable sedan. It gets you where you need to go with no fuss. Linux is like a powerful sports car. It takes some skill to handle, but once you do, it's exhilarating.
The same instability issues can be said for a lot of programs that ship with the operating system. Internet Explorer was a hilariously bad web browser. It was always buggy and slow compared to Chromium browsers and Firefox, and a big reason for that is those browsers are based on open source projects. Millions of people have looked at the code of these browsers, and some of them even made improvements to it. It's really hard to create a private development team that can outcompete the entire open source community, which is why even Microsoft decided to make their Edge browser a Chromium clone with some proprietary features bolted on. The open source nature of Linux and its leaner design also makes it much more secure than Windows. There's a lot of eyes on the Linux kernel and the core utilities that make up most distributions, and a lot of companies, including Microsoft themselves, have audited the code in Linux and use it for their own applications, WSL being a great example. But there's only a small select number of people at Microsoft that have really seen the code for Windows 11, and even then, a lot of the developers at Microsoft probably only have access to the source code of the specific subcomponent that they're working on, and maybe some of the parts that it interacts directly with, instead of every application and every code library and kernel module that makes up the entirety of Windows. So bug fixes generally roll out faster in the Linux world, and hell, if you're a talented programmer, you can literally just fix bugs yourself in the kernel or some other application, and submit a patch to its maintainers, and forever be recorded in history as a contributor to the Linux kernel or to the greater open source world. And that's also a great thing to list on your resume, since again, so many companies around the world are using Linux, and if you're familiar with it enough to submit code that even Linus Torvalds himself approves of, then that alone could put you at the top of a hire list and maybe get you a pay bump. And another big benefit of Linux for the home desktop user is the customizability that is available, again, due to the open source nature of Linux and its very modular design. I generally recommend distros like Linux Mint for beginners because its desktop layout is very familiar to Windows users, and there's graphical applications that make installing new programs and customizing your system a breeze, and very similar to what you might experience in the Windows world. But if you get brave enough to start using the terminal on Linux and you dip your toe into the world of ricing, you'll discover that there's basically no end to how much you can customize your user interface. This is also part of the reason why Linux is used on so many different kinds of devices, and Windows hasn't had a whole lot of success outside of the desktop world. And the broader reason for switching to Linux is to finally have real control over your computer. Because even if you aren't a power user that's going to tinker with your operating system a whole lot, you'll still get more freedom to choose your hardware. Like I said earlier, there's computers that are less than 10 years old that have more than enough power to run typical modern workloads like web browsing, streaming video, emails, office tools, and you can even play modern AAA games on those systems as long as you have a good enough graphics card to pair with that CPU. I'm thinking that this year might actually be a huge opportunity for people to build budget gaming PCs because Windows 10's end of life is going to see a lot of older PCs being scrapped, so secondhand CPUs without TPM 2.0 will probably be pretty cheap. And even though they're going to bottleneck the performance with the better RTX cards, you could still get acceptable FPS in these brand new games, and I bet the better GTX cards are still going to hold up nicely in games too if you just turn down some of the eye candy and of course you don't use ray tracing. Having control over your PC also lets you protect yourself from getting spied on. It's no secret that Microsoft has turned Windows into a spyware tool that they use to collect data to fuel their ads network and their AI training. And this is part of the reason why Windows has gotten so bad over the years. Microsoft gives the OS away for free now because its entire purpose is to become an endpoint for collecting that data. Now sure, there's settings within Windows to opt out of most of this data collection, but because all of the source code is proprietary, it's really hard to actually verify that you're not sending any data to Microsoft. And because Linux distributions are so decentralized and so many people are wanting better privacy and so they started using them already, the default settings in Linux typically don't opt you into any kind of data collection or telemetry. So better privacy, better performance, cost savings, better security, and more customizability are just a handful of the reasons to choose desktop Linux as your Windows 10 replacement this October. So give it a go, try out Linux Mint on a live USB or a virtual machine today so that you're at least somewhat familiar with it before Windows 11's AI hell is unleashed upon the world.
Windows has a massive advantage here with its vast library of applications, games, and professional software. It's the industry standard for a reason. You want the latest Adobe Creative Suite? No problem. The hottest AAA games? You got it. Specialized industry tools? Windows likely has it covered. Linux, on the other hand, relies heavily on its open-source community. Don't get me wrong, there are tons of amazing open-source alternatives available, like GIMP for image editing, LibreOffice for productivity, and Blender for 3D modeling. And the open-source community is constantly developing and improving these tools. Plus, you've got a growing selection of games on Linux thanks to platforms like Steam Proton. But, there's no denying that some popular Windows-only software still lacks a native Linux counterpart. So, if you heavily rely on specific professional software or are a die-hard gamer who needs the latest and greatest titles, Windows might be the safer bet. Let's talk security, a topic that's more important than ever. Now, Linux is often considered the more secure operating system, and for good reason. Its open-source nature means that the code is constantly reviewed by a global community of developers. This transparency makes it harder for vulnerabilities to go unnoticed, and for malware to take hold. Plus, Linux has a more granular permission system, making it difficult for malicious software to gain access to sensitive data. Windows, on the other hand, has historically been a bigger target for malware attacks. Its widespread use and closed-source nature have made it a more appealing target for hackers. However, Microsoft has made significant strides in improving Windows security over the years. Windows Defender has become a robust antivirus solution, and features like Windows Hello and Secure Boot add extra layers of protection. But it's important to stay vigilant, keep your system updated, and practice safe browsing habits no matter which OS you choose. Now, let's talk performance. This is where things get really interesting. Linux is known for its efficiency and ability to run smoothly even on older hardware. It's like breathing new life into that aging laptop you thought was ready for retirement. Its lightweight distributions like Ubuntu or Lubuntu can squeeze every ounce of performance out of limited resources. Windows, while constantly being optimized, can be a bit more demanding on your system's hardware. It requires more RAM, processing power, and storage space, especially for the latest versions. However, Windows often holds an edge when it comes to high-end performance, particularly in areas like gaming and professional software. It has better driver support for the latest graphics cards and processors, giving it an advantage in demanding tasks like video editing, 3D rendering, and of course, gaming. Last but not least, let's talk cost. This is where Linux delivers a knockout punch. Most Linux distributions are completely free to download, use, and even distribute. That's right, no licensing fees, no subscription costs, just pure, unadulterated freedom. This open-source spirit is a major draw for many users, especially in education, research, and budget-conscious environments. Windows, on the other hand, requires a license to use legally. The cost of a Windows license can vary depending on the version and whether you're purchasing it for personal or commercial use. Now, you can find pre-built PCs that come with Windows pre-installed, which can soften the blow. But that initial cost is something to consider, especially if you're on a tight budget. So if you're looking for the most cost-effective option, Linux is the clear winner. So which one is better? It really depends on your needs and preferences. If you value ease of use, software compatibility, and a familiar experience, Windows is a solid choice. If you prioritize flexibility, security, performance on older hardware, and cost savings, Linux might be your perfect match. Ultimately, the best OS is the one that fits your workflow, budget, and technical comfort level. Let us know in the comments which OS you prefer and why. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more tech comparisons.